Hello everyone, my name is Kinky, and today we're going to be talking about the Druid talent trees for Classic WoW. Now that we have confirmation from Blizzard that we're going to be on patch 1.12, Drums of War, we can actually dive into this knowing what will and won't be viable in Classic. The good news is that with patch 1.12, a lot of specs are now viable. What I also want to do with this new series of videos is not tell anyone what will or won't be played, but give you an idea of how you can play any spec in any class of this game, whether it be deemed viable or not. Today we're going to take a look at one of the more complex classes, the Druid. The reason for me saying that the Druid is complex is because of the sole fact that it has 4 roles to fill and only 3 talent trees. And 3 of those 4 roles, there are multiple ways to build those specs. Starting off with the least complicated, the balance tree did not have as many skills as most would like in the balance tree that were actual benefits to the boomkin. The talents are actually there, so don't get me wrong, but 2 of the late talents in the balance tree are more beneficial for healing than they are for boomkin. This here is what your basic balanced druid will look like. Pretty much anything that will add to your damage or reduce cast time will be a requirement for moonkin. The reasoning for speccing down into the resto tree instead of pulling up the 5th talent into improved Starfire is for the mana regen and additional dot that restoration offers. If you're going to PvP, you may want to consider dropping your resto talents and picking up some feral talents instead. A balanced PvP spec may look something like this. The loss of Moon Glow will make you go through mana quite fast, but personally in a PvP situation, I would rather have the snare and extra stun from Feral Charge. You will likely not need to have the extra buff capability for your Mark of the Wild because there will likely be other druids in your party for that. That being said, if you're planning on open world PvP, a lot of this spec could be considered garbage. Feral is where things start to get a little interesting. Within the 1 talent tree, there are requirements for both cat and bear builds, as well as talents that are just for bears and talents that are just for cats. The talents that are required for both builds are mainly DPS increases, but it's very important for the bear to make sure that they can maintain their aggro. This is basically what a PvE cat build would look like. You have some room to play with 2 points that you can swap up a little bit. I personally prefer to have it in feline swiftness for the extra movement speed, but some people will prefer to put it into brutal impact for an additional 1 second added to their bash and pounce. Some of you will be questioning the natural shapeshifter talents, which reduces mana cost of shapeshifting spells by 30%, and Fur, which gives you 40 energy whenever you shapeshift into cat form. All I can say is that you're going to need these, because you're going to be going in and out of cat form to get your energy back to be able to cast more spells while in cat form. The constant shape-shifting is a major part of DPSing on a feral druid. Now this is what the base PvP spec would look like for a cat. It's very similar to the PvE spec, but there are 2 noticeable changes. The first being the change in the balance tree. Instead of having the faster Wrath cast, the free entangling roots is going to be a lot more helpful. The second part is taking the 2 points out of improved shred. Those 2 points are more beneficial to put them into another one of the PvP talents. This is where I like to take brutal impact, but feral instinct and thick hide are 2 other options, and could be considered when putting your spec together. There are usually 2 bear builds that you will want to consider at cap. The build that you will most commonly see is this one here. The choice between the 2 builds is, do you want to go down the resto tree or do you want to go down the balance tree? Both require you to have 40 points in feral though. Most bears take the resto tree for the extra rage generation and insect swarm for the 2% hit reduction. That being said, sometimes you will see a bear go down the balance tree. Balance will give you more DPS with natural weapons and Omen of Clarity, which is good for tanking because it equates to extra threat generation. There is another PvP spec that is a hybrid between feral and resto. Not only is it a hybrid between feral and resto, it usually takes both cat and bear talents. The reason for going into the resto tree is for nature's swiftness. While you are out PvPing, being able to instantly cast a big chunky heal on yourself and immediately go back into bear or cat form is pretty dangerous. This spec will also get you more rage and energy because of Furor. Improved rage also gives you an extra 10 rage whenever you enrage, which doesn't hurt either. The mana game is very important for a druid. A lot of players will see Swift Mend and be very tempted to jump all the way down to grab it just because of how great of a spell it is. However, a Resto Druid in Classic does not cast many spells that aren't named Healing Touch. Not at least until you get into your crit build. Until you're into AQ 40 or well into your Blackwing Lair farm, this is what your spec is going to look like. Everything is based around increasing the benefits for Healing Touch, whether it be mana cost reduction, a flat increase in its healing, instant cast heals, or even threat reduction. Some of you may be wondering why we're putting points in certain places in the balance spec. It's rather simple. If healing isn't needed, you're going to be casting Wrath. So instead of spending points to buff Starfire or Moonfire, most druids would put their points in utility talents like Improved Thorns. This spec will be used a little bit later in the game. There are two things that you will need before trying this spec, however. The first being, you just need better gear. You need to have a better base mana pool so that way you can freely cast spells other than just Healing Touch. The second and more important part is to have the 5-piece tier 2 bonus. You will notice with this spec that we dropped Moonglow in favor of Improved Regrowth. Basically, what you will want to do is still mainly just be casting Healing Touches, but you will be throwing out some lower ranked regrowths just to get the proc of Nature's Grace. You will see how it all combos off each other. You have a 50% crit increase with Improved Regrowth, minus 2 seconds on the casting time with your tier 2 bonus on Regrowth, and when you crit with Regrowth, it's going to proc your Nature's Grace, which is going to cause your next Healing Touch's cast time to be reduced by half a second. This is the last spec that you will commonly see for a Resto Druid, and unless you're in a raiding environment, it is more than likely going to be the spec that you see everywhere because it is commonplace outside of raids for 5-man dungeons. It's a pretty straightforward spec, just putting as much benefits into as many of your healing spells as possible. This should be the one time that you'll actually see a druid using Swift Mend. And this last one is the PvP spec for a Resto Druid. It's a pretty cookie cutter build. There's not much typical flux in your PvP build for a Resto Druid. I don't think I need to point out too many of the spells here because we've already gone over most of them already, but what I will say about this build is that it's great for healing in battlegrounds as well as becoming a flag carrier. In terms of talents for the Feral Tree, the only talent you're missing for survivability is Heart of the Wild, which yes, is a big deal if you're supposed to be tanking, but for situational flag carrying, it can also work great. Anyways guys, that's all I got for you today. Let me know down in the comments what build you plan on playing if you end up rolling a druid. I also want to know from you guys what class I should go over like this next. Let me know down in the comments about that as well. Take care everyone, and I'll see you in the next one.
Hey, it's Radit here. Don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe as well. It really helps out the channel. We put out multiple new videos each week and we appreciate all of your support. Thanks for watching everyone, and cheers.